The hidden cost of being self-aware, on the quiet burden of watching yourself live. The observer in the room. Most people want more self-awareness. They journal, they sit in therapy, they read books about understanding themselves better. Self-awareness is sold to us as the ultimate personal virtue, the thing that separates the examined life from the wasted one. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living, and we believed him so completely that we forgot to ask the question he never answered. What happens to the person who cannot stop examining? Because there is a version of self-awareness that does not liberate. It surveils. It stands in the corner of every room you enter, every feeling you begin to feel, and it watches. It asks, constantly and without mercy, why did you say that? What did you really mean? Who are you, exactly, beneath all of this? And the person beneath all of this, the one just trying to live, begins to disappear under the weight of the watching. The mirror that never rests. The psychologist Charles Cooley introduced a concept in 1902 that has aged disturbingly well, the looking glass self. We do not form identity from the inside out. We form it by imagining how we appear to others, then building a self around that reflection. George Herbert Mead went further, describing the self as a conversation between the I, the spontaneous acting self, and the me, the self as social object, observed and evaluated. In the healthy person, these two coexist. In the hyper-self-aware person, the me has staged a hostile takeover. The I barely gets a word in. You have felt this. You are mid-sentence and already watching the sentence from the outside, editing it, regretting it before it finishes. You are mid-feeling and something in you is already questioning whether the feeling is proportionate. You experience almost nothing raw. Everything arrives pre-processed. This is not insight. This is the observer crushing the observed. When insight becomes injury. Psychologist Tasha Eurich found something that should alarm anyone who prizes introspection. Internal self-awareness, the kind that constantly asks why we think and feel what we do, is often negatively correlated with well-being. People who introspect heavily are not, on average, happier or more accurate about themselves. Frequently, they are less so. The reason is the difference between processing an experience and endlessly recycling it. Introspection without direction becomes a loop. You are not gaining clarity, you are deepening the groove of a thought that was never going anywhere. Nietzsche, who understood psychological self-destruction because he was living it, wrote, "And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." The abyss he meant was not only external, it was the self, examined without mercy, without rest. The person who turns the full force of their intelligence onto themselves will eventually find not the solid core of identity they were searching for, but an endless regression, every motive suspected, every feeling held to the light until it dissolves into something unrecognizable. Keats and What We Lose. In 1817, Keats coined a phrase that philosophy has never fully credited him for: negative capability, the ability to remain inside uncertainty and mystery without irritably reaching after reason and fact. He was describing what excessive self-consciousness destroys first, the capacity to simply be inside an experience without immediately converting it into data about yourself. The poet who watches himself write cannot write. The person who observes every feeling before allowing it has already changed it into something curated, managed, and half-dead. What was genuine becomes a studied approximation of genuineness, and somewhere in the gap between the two, the actual person quietly slips away. Self-awareness, past a certain threshold, is not the deepening of life, it is the beginning of its performance. The examined life and its quiet casualties. R.D. Laing, the Scottish psychiatrist, wrote in The Divided Self, 1960, about a self so conscious of itself that it had split, the observing self and the observed self coming apart entirely. He called it ontological insecurity. Most of us will never reach that extreme, but we have all touched the edge of it. The nights when you lie awake thinking about thinking about thinking, when the self-examination has gone so deep that it has lost its object entirely. And here is what no one mentions. The more sophisticated your self-awareness, the more elaborate the prison, because you can see the bars so clearly. You can name them, trace their origin, explain their function, quote the philosopher who first described them, and still not be free. Intelligence about your own cage is not the same as the key. This is the particular cruelty of the examined life. It can make you fluent in your own suffering without ever making you less of it. So, what does self-awareness actually cost in the end? It costs you spontaneity, the ability to act without commentary, to feel before filing the feeling under a category. It costs you presence, because the observer is never fully inside the moment. It is always at a slight remove, watching, recording, evaluating. The most self-aware person in the room is often the least there. It costs you the mercy of not knowing. Some things, encountered without the apparatus of self-analysis, pass through you gently. Observed, named, interrogated, they calcify, they become problems, they become permanent. And most quietly, it costs you the self you were before you started watching, the one who laughed without wondering why, who loved without immediately auditing the love, who existed fully and without audit in an unexamined life that Socrates may have dismissed far too quickly. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not a solution, because there isn't one, but a reorientation. Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, directed outward, towards others, towards the world, which implies its shadow, that attention perpetually turned inward is, in some essential way, a generosity withheld, from others, from life, from yourself. Rumi did not write about understanding the self, he wrote about losing it, into presence, into love, into something larger than the endless interior monologue of I. The Sufis called the destination fana, not the destruction of the self, but the liberation of it from its own surveillance. You cannot think your way out of thinking, you cannot observe your way to unobserving. The instrument at some point must be set down, not abandoned, not destroyed, simply rested, the way you rest any tool that has been gripped too long and too tightly. Because here is the truth that self-awareness, for all its depth, cannot see about itself. The goal was never to know yourself completely. The goal was to be free enough, light enough, present enough to occasionally forget yourself entirely. And in that forgetting, just for a moment, just long enough, to finally, fully arrive. The examined life is worth living, but only if you remember sometimes to stop examining it and simply live it.